Hi, everyone. It's April 17th, 2020, and it's a great day in America because we're opening up again. We're opening America. If you haven't watched the press conference from last night, April 16th, please go back and watch it. It's fantastic. It's what a lot of people have been waiting to hear. Now, the first 17 minutes is President Trump. He recaps our accomplishments. So he does all the normal things that a president would do. It's very presidential, by the way. Dr. Birx comes in at about the 24-minute mark, and she really lays out the plan. So if you want to, you can skip ahead to Dr. Birx and see what we're doing. I'll break it down for you real quick. They present graphs, and they use ILI, influenza-like illness. Apparently, this is data that we've been collecting every year for a long time. So they show these sort of curves, right, of a rise in infections and a lowering in infections. And they show that the United States, if you look at coronavirus, and they're actually combining coronavirus with all other influenza-like illnesses. So we're not just tracking coronavirus any longer. We're looking at everything. So we're on the downward trend overall as a country. They showed New Orleans coming down. That's very good. And what they've done is they've created this framework, these guidelines to push out to the states so that each of the states can implement their go back to work or opening up strategy. They said it can be implemented at the state level or even at the county level. So wherever your state is, you might see different guidelines in different counties depending on what they're tracking. Another thing I learned watching Fauci talk on news stations or whatever, we've been in mitigation. There's another term, containment. So this plan that we have right now is if we see the 14-day decline, that says that our mitigation is working or we've reached a point where we can start to move towards containment. There might be some confusion. Well, we were told before it's all mitigation. It's all mitigation. If we loosen the standards, isn't the virus going to spread? Obviously, that's a risk, but we're moving from mitigation into containment. Just a term to keep in mind, and also maybe it helps you wrap your mind around, well, one day we're doing one thing and now we're doing another. We're told this keeps us safe. How is this going to keep us safe? We're moving to a different phase, if you will, in the evolution of infectious disease control. First, it starts with gating requirements. There have to be some minimum requirements in place. Part of that's the graphs. Part of that is hospital capacity. And a main part of the graphs is 14 days of a downward trend. If you see that and you have the preparedness things in place, then you can move to the phases. They use a new word I had to look up, sentinel surveillance. Sentinel surveillance is qualifying certain groups, certain large hospitals usually, to be the main providers of this particular type of data. So they would have to meet certain requirements, follow certain procedures. So sort of a higher quality of data. That's going to be a piece of what we use going forward. They also talked about that we need to pay close attention to highly vulnerable populations. Older people, lower income people, racial minorities, and Native Americans. If you think about it, most of our healthcare, most of our resources just are naturally where the money is. So your best hospitals and your best resources are where the money is. So they've put requirements in here to ensure that we go against that to make an extra effort to test people that are in poor neighborhoods, even, Native Americans. So that's all good. Now, the phases, okay, once you meet the gating criteria, there are some guidelines for all phases. Things like social distancing and hygiene. They split the guidelines up by employer and by individual. So this is what you should do as an individual. This is what you should do as an employer. Phase 1, shelter vulnerable people. No more than 10 people in a gathering. Very similar to where we are right now. Close schools, stay closed. Gyms and large restaurants can open as long as they can show that they maintain a strict sanitation and social distancing. So your local gyms may open under phase 1. Now, I don't know if there's document behind that, if they define strict, but I'll talk more at the end about how this government regulation thing works. This is how it's always been done. Phase 2. So if you have the 14 days of decline and you have all the gating factors in place, and one of them is having enough extra capacity to surge, ICU surge capacity. Once you implement phase one, as long as you're maintaining that, it's up to the governors to decide if they want to move to phase two. Now, by the guideline, what would stop you from moving to phase two? Maybe it's a leveling out on the decline. Maybe it's a start, an uptick in infections. Any of that, you have to roll back to a prior phase, maybe even go back to mitigation in some areas. So phase two, no gatherings greater than 50. So we went from 10 people to 50 people. Phase one for employers stops non-essential travel. Phase two allows non-essential travel to resume. They still encourage teleworking. Common areas in a business need to be closed, or they need to have a procedure in place to maintain social distancing and, of course, hygiene. Schools may reopen under phase two. Still no visiting of senior care facilities, large venues. Prior, they said large venues can open with strict sanitation and social distancing, strict social distancing. And in phase two, large venues can reduce that to modest. Obviously, we still have that 50-person limit. So sports arenas and things aren't included in that. Phase three, return to normal. Okay, the new normal, I guess. We're going to still have hygiene. We're going to, as Barks put it, respect space. So I guess social distancing because of the risk of asymptomatic spread. So people that are infected that don't know it, even though all of our numbers are way, way down, the virus can still be out there. Contact tracing is mentioned. There is no federal mandate for software to track people. Contact tracing could simply be an interview. If you go in, you're tested, you're found to be positive, they say, where have you been the last 2 weeks? Tell us, where do you work? Have you gone to any restaurants? Have you done anything? And then they might publicize that information. We saw some of that with AIDS, the AIDS epidemic. So, yes, very, very good. Very good stuff. Fauci talks, and hey, this thing's an hour and 12 minutes long. If you spend anywhere near an hour reading news, reading opinion, watching news, please make sure you watch this press conference. Even the Q&A part was very, very good. There's some negativity out there. CNN is running an angle that Trump reverses course. Well, there was never any course. I mean, the only outlet saying that is CNN. Trump's bluster about, I can do whatever I want, was a boast. Well, sparring with the media, he never said, I am going to tell the states what to do. He said, I can do whatever I want to do. Not true, probably, from a legal standpoint, but that's not the point. It was never a policy. The Opening America guidelines puts the responsibility and the autonomy on the governors of the states to implement the guidelines in their state. And CNN, I went there right after the press briefing, and that's their angle, right? He reversed course. No, he didn't reverse any course. That's just ridiculous. Now, the Democrats obviously are coming out, saw some remarks from Pelosi and Biden. They're coming out with their counter. That's all politics, right? It doesn't matter how good the plan is that the current president puts into place. It could be absolutely perfect. And I think this is really good, by the way. The other party is always going to look for some reason to say it's no good. If you're a Democrat and that speaks to you and you enjoy that kind of thing, hey, go for it. But for those of you out there that just really want to know what's going on, there's a politics going on, right? But politics doesn't get anything done. Politics doesn't protect us from pandemics. Politics doesn't save us from anything. It's the work of people like Fauci and Birx and the president and the governors. Presidents and governors are different than Congress people. Congress people are 90% politicians. They have meetings, they talk, they review with people. They don't do a whole lot. They don't have direct responsibility over any activities going on in the country. A president and a governor, they're like CEOs of their governments. They have, in this case, infectious disease. All the departments of the federal government, the president's the CEO. And on the state level, that's the governor. Presidents and governors have direct responsibility, a leadership role over their governments, and they're involved. They're very much involved in getting things done, solving problems. The politics doesn't really solve anything, right? The politics just says, vote for me, vote for me. That's all that it really does. Now, sometimes, they can offer some alternatives that the other side's not doing, and that can be good. But right now, all I'm seeing is politics. You can ignore all that. You can ignore all the blame game and just rest assured that we're well on our way. Let me tell you a little bit about how government works in my experience, okay? We have OSHA. We have other regulatory agencies, and they will publish requirements and standards and regulations to say all employers must provide a safe work environment. They may put a little more meat on that. They may say all employers have to address the need for slip and fall, or they don't tell specifically how to do that. That would be counterproductive, because if you were very specific about how everything is done in a company or from the federal government to the state, then you're tying their hands, okay? At the time you write the regulation, maybe you've done a great job and you've considered every possible option for how to accomplish and meet a requirement. Well, it doesn't take very long, especially with technology, for new options to come available, for new practices. There's one governor may do one thing and another governor may do another, and they learn from one another. Even implementing a plan like this, as we move into it, they'll learn a lot of things. But if the regulations were tightly controlling the governors, tightly controlling the hospitals and everyone, best practices would quickly evolve beyond what was written down by the government. They provide, this is what you have to address this. You have to have a plan in place. You have to evaluate. Now, they will work with the governors. Watch the press briefing, watch especially Dr. Birx, and pretend you're a business owner, pretend you're an employer, and say, okay, now I see what my guidelines are. I see what I need to do. Right away, you'll start having questions. Well, yeah, I'm not sure I know the best practices. They said that I have to sanitize. What does that really mean? What's the best sanitization? That they would look to their state government, okay? And the state government agencies would look to industry experts. They might look to the federal government. There'll be talks, there'll be questions, and so people will work together to accomplish this. We talk about he's not a king, right? But then they'll say, oh, his rules don't go tight, so we want a king that's going to dictate out everything that everyone does. No, that's not how it works. Federal government provides guidelines and resources. When I talked in the past, I said I don't really know where the legal lines are as far as presidential authority dictating to the states. What I expected to happen was the federal government was going to come out with guidelines, recommendations, and they were going to provide resources to support it. And that's exactly what happened. That's because that's how these things are normally done. That's how they're handled. So that's what we're seeing here. We're seeing the federal government came out with a standard that was developed 90% infectious disease experts, and then that's pushed out to the states. The governors already had input. We also know that they have a committee with 100 plus industry leaders involved, and that will help provide resources to employers so that they understand, how do I meet this requirement? What are the best practices available to do this? Because, another issue is going to become supplies. Where do they buy their disinfecting supplies? What's acceptable? So there'll be a lot of and there may actually be standards developed already for this stuff that'll be referred to. So that's where we are, right? We're turning America back on. I mean, it's awesome. It's a really exciting time. This is very, very positive. There's nothing negative going on here at all. Sure, we can scrutinize it and we can have opinions and things like that, but don't let any of the politics distract you. I'm really excited. If you've been in we need the economy turned back on camp, why can't certain states go back before others? Why can't we just protect vulnerable populations? Every single one of those ideas, every single one of those, why can't we, is in this. It's in this plan. So it's a great day, light at the end of the tunnel, right? It's not over. There may be areas that move towards containment and have to back into mitigation again. Sports. I can see sports possibly, instead of playing their normal locations, going to neutral sites in places where maybe it's a smaller audience, but it's an area where it's safer. So, who knows? All right. Thank you very much for watching. Give me a like, give me a share, and above all, give me a subscribe. Comment, questions, any ideas you have. I'll certainly be checking them. God bless.